2001, South Africa found itself in the grip of gold fever.
It escalated beyond control.
A small-town businessman might have stumbled upon a long-lost fortune, the Kruger Millions.
There was talk of £1 million and more.
This was the reputed war chest of legendary Boer statesman Paul Kruger. But in the confusion of a savage war, it disappeared.
People believed that some of the coins was hidden somewhere, was buried.
For over a century, treasure hunters had been seeking this elusive hoard of gold and chasing the legend of one rogue soldier who claimed to know its location.
He became known as the man who hid the Kruger Millions.
This is the story of a missing fortune, a double-crossing spy, and a wary skeptic swept up in the adventure of a lifetime.
But when you see that, it's like, oh my God, this is true. I was completely convinced that this was the Kruger Millions.
May 1900. The first war of the 20th century, the Boer War, was raging. In the midst of this brutal conflict, a vast fortune unaccountably vanished. According to legend, it was buried somewhere in the wide-open grasslands of the South African bushveld. This treasure, named in honor of Paul Kruger, one of South Africa's founding fathers, is known as the Kruger Millions.
I believe probably a very large percentage of South Africans know about the Kruger Millions, and you'll actually be amazed how many people are actually aware of it.
The Kruger Millions consists of an untold number of solid gold coins, each bearing the head of Paul Kruger himself. They were minted to fund his people's fight against the greatest superpower of the day, the British Empire.
This is one of the 1900 pounds. This is gold, 95% pure gold, hardened slightly with some other material because pure gold is very soft.
The most valuable of these so-called Kruger pounds can fetch up to £6,000 each at auction.
It's not because they're gold. These are valuable because they have a connection with South Africa's history.
Ever since the end of the war in 1902, people have been searching for this treasure trove of buried gold. Athol Stark knew the legend as well as anyone. He is a successful businessman in a bustling town called Ermelo, in the heart of the South African veldt. For most of his life, Athol never paid much attention to rumors of gold buried in the plains beyond the edge of town.
I'm not a treasure hunter. I'm not a person that every weekend or every day off puts my spade across my shoulder. I'm a business person. It was never a subject of interest to me at all.
But at the turn of the 21st century, an extraordinary series of events would change Athol's life forever. He would unwittingly become the central figure in one of the strangest gold rushes of all time. His story has the most ordinary of beginnings, when a man with debt problems came calling in 1999.
A gentleman arrived at my home that is very well known to me, and he asked for my help. His motorcar was about to be repossessed because he'd failed to pay 3 months of payments.
Athol often gave financial advice, and there was nothing unusual about this particular client, until the moment he mentioned a relative who had come into some money.
Right at the end, it said that his uncle was perhaps somebody that could help him because the uncle had coins. He didn't say money, he said coins. And obviously I've zoned in on the coins thing because this was, and I said to him, you're talking about money? And he said, no, coins. You know, like, what kind of coins? And he kind of said, coins like this, that size, and it's yellow and it's got Kruger's head on it.
The coins the man described were clearly none other than Kruger pounds. Athol suddenly saw a chance to strike it rich. Possibly this was just some kind of scam. Then again, perhaps, just perhaps, these coins were genuine and part of the famed Kruger Millions.
I told him that the only way that I would be interested in even getting involved is I needed to see at least 1,000 of these coins. And it was just a number. It wasn't like a determined amount of money. It was just kind of, I need to see 1,000 of these coins before I would even get involved.
Much to Athol's surprise, the very next day he received an invitation to visit a nearby black township. The Zulu client and his elderly relatives wanted to meet Athol and show him 1,000 gold coins, just as he requested.
They came in with 3 paraffin tins, and just by looking at them you could see these things were pretty old. They opened up one of them and they poured out a reasonable amount of coins onto the table.
There, on the table in front of Athol, were dozens of Kruger pounds, with many hundreds more waiting to be poured out.
Up to the moment where they walked in with those paraffin cans, I didn't actually believe. I thought it was a scam. I thought I was going to get robbed.
In that moment, the mythical treasure had become real.
Yes, they were Kruger coins. Yes, they were gold.
Then Athol made a critical mistake by trying to inspect one of the coins. As far as the family was concerned, Athol was there to look, not to touch. He was unceremoniously shoved off the property, and he assumed he would never hear from these people again. However, 2 weeks later, Athol got a phone call. The Zulu family now had a business proposition. They wanted his help to sell some of their coins.
I managed to find somebody that could purchase coins, set up a deal with these people, and it appears that they were able to sell quite a number of coins.
In exchange for setting up the deal, Athol was given a handsome reward. 42 Kruger pounds, worth tens of thousands in today's money.
The grandmother's attitude had changed quite dramatically. She basically gave me 2 handfuls of gold coins, and I was made to understand that this was a thank you for the fact that I had helped them, with all the problems that they'd had in selling the coins.
Once, Athol didn't believe the Kruger Millions even existed. Now, he found himself holding his own small piece of it. Athol was transformed from wary skeptic into a true believer.
I'd go and open up the safe and line them up on the dresser and look at them in the mirror, because it was just so almost unbelievable that we had something so tangible which was related back to so much confusion about this thing. And you just look at them, it's sort of like this wonder of where these things were.
What's more, if the legend was right, the coins Athol had seen were just a small part of a huge motherlode, which had been missing for a century.
I mean, this is a fabulous wealth even in that time. Now it's billions of rands if all records are to be believed. If we look at this information, what happened to that money? We started to ask a lot of people a lot of questions.
If Athol could find it, he would be wealthy beyond imagination. But before he could begin to dig for gold, he had to delve deep into the past. He needed to know the truth behind the Kruger Millions and how it disappeared. Athol's research took him right back to the late 19th century. At that time, South Africa was a divided country. The undisputed power in the land was the British Empire. But the Boers, Afrikaans-speaking white farmers, held a large swathe of territory and refused to join the imperial fold.
The Afrikaners wanted freedom from the British, just as much as we colonials wanted freedom from the British in 1776.
The British had tolerated Boer autonomy for years, but in 1886, everything changed. The world's richest goldfields were discovered in the heart of Boer territory. Britain wanted them for herself.
When the Boers did not just want to willingly hand over the country, and because of the gold that had been discovered in the Witwatersrand, which is the Johannesburg area, they invaded South Africa with thousands and thousands of British troops.
War was inevitable, and it broke out on the 11th of October, 1899.
The British government and the military thought this was going to be a pushover. This would be over by Christmas.
The Boer survival depended on the cunning prowess of their political leader, Paul Kruger.
Paul Kruger was an Afrikaner or Boer whose shadow was cast all over South Africa in the second half of the 19th century. He almost personifies Boer independence.
From this modest house in his capital, Pretoria, Kruger orchestrated a two-pronged plan for victory. First, he had to keep his country's gold out of British hands. He ordered millions of ounces to be extracted from the country's mines and sent for safekeeping to this building, the Transvaal Mint. Here, almost all of it was turned into coins, each worth £1 South African pound.
Nobody outside the government knew how much gold there was in state possession now. There was talk of £1 million and more, but nobody really knew.
Second, Kruger knew his small citizen militia could never defeat the mighty British army in head-to-head combat. So he told them to rely on guerrilla warfare.
It was hit-and-run tactics. Men who were not expected to have any military background turned out to be quite good strategists.
For several months, the fast-moving Boer armies had the advantage. One of their best fighters was a young officer named Fritz Joubert Duquesne, a man who would soon become inextricably linked to the legend of the Kruger Millions.
Fritz was born in South Africa, and he was educated at schools in South Africa and then in Britain, where he claimed to become the handsomest man in Europe and the finest swordsman in Europe. And he returned to South Africa to participate in the Boer War.
Like most Boer fighters, Duquesne had a family farm in the heart of the war zone. And while the men were at the front, the women were left to tend it on their own. The British knew this, and infuriated with their inability to defeat the Boers in a so-called fair fight, they resorted to an utterly ruthless strategy: scorched earth.
British army devastated the region by destroying all the farms, removing all the people, putting them into concentration camps.
One day, the British came calling to the Duquesne family farm.
His farm was totally destroyed, crops burned, and family imprisoned. Of course, they had no defense against the British soldiers.
The soldiers reportedly raped and killed Duquesne's sister, and then raped his mother, before taking her away to a concentration camp.
Fritz's family were imprisoned, and that's where his mother died. He developed this great hate for the British, and he had this hate all his life.
Duquesne declared himself Britain's arch-enemy, vowing to kill 100 Englishmen for every drop of his family's spilt blood. What's more, he hatched a daring plan to strike at the empire itself. He would ensure that Britain would not be able to claim a single ounce of South African gold. If he pulled it off, he would be a hero, and possibly a very rich man. By late May 1900, the Empire's army was at the gates of Pretoria. With the vaults full of gold under threat, Paul Kruger took drastic action to save his struggling nation and its vast riches.
On Monday, the 4th of June, the gold was weighed, put into boxes. They were put onto wagons, and by about noon they were taken to Pretoria Station, where they were put onto a train.
In broad daylight, every penny of the money was rushed through the streets of Pretoria. At the station, a special train was prepared to carry it to safety.
And this was happening just literally minutes before the British invaded the area.
As the train moved off, the first British shells were bursting around them.
The plan appeared to be a brilliant success. When the British finally arrived in the city, they found that Kruger was gone. And so was all the gold. The mint was empty. But to get the gold out in time, Kruger had blown one of his best-kept secrets.
The whole way of how the gold was removed from the mint on Church Square really started the Kruger Million rumor. And there's a wonderful story about that, because it was done in the open.
Kruger had to get the gold to Europe, where he could buy arms and supplies for his ragtag army. But the British controlled the entire South African coastline, and most of the railways too. Kruger was trapped, and so was the gold. The only possible exit was via Delagoa Bay in the neighboring Portuguese colony of Mozambique. The gold-laden train sped for the border.
This train was on the railway line from Pretoria to Delagoa Bay, and this railway line was the only one that was not in British hands yet. The government withdrew along the railway line towards a little town called Machadodorp.
Machadodorp was the last town in Boer territory, and in the dead of night, the train stopped there. On this unassuming railway siding, Kruger ordered a small party of officials to set up a government in exile. Leaving them behind, Kruger himself escaped to Mozambique. But, fearing capture on the high seas by the Royal Navy, he left without the money.
The money was on the train, and the train was parked at Machadodorp. After that, it kind of gets a bit foggy, because in a war situation, there's not a lot of bookkeeping and note-taking of what's really going down.
Into this fog of war stepped none other than Fritz Duquesne. After the death of his family, Duquesne had become one of the most notorious guerrillas in the Boer army, nicknamed the Black Panther of the Veldt. Knowing his exploits would endear him to the Boer High Command, Duquesne went to Machadodorp and offered to help protect the gold.
He had fought in a couple of battles, and he also claimed that he was a relative of Fritz Joubert, who was a military leader among the South Africans, and so it was not difficult for him to be placed in charge.
By now, the British were closing fast on the few remaining Boer strongholds. The Kruger Millions were in great danger. To save them, Duquesne was apparently entrusted to take the lot by wagon and bury it in a secret location. A party of soldiers was assigned to accompany him, but sworn to secrecy. Duquesne did not tell them they were escorting a great fortune in gold. Only Duquesne knew what was really in the wagons.
There were about 30 wagons, and as they penetrated further, many of the men found out that there was gold. They didn't realize there was gold in bullion in the wagons, and so they wanted to steal it themselves.
The wagon train spent 2 weeks trekking through the veldt, avoiding the ever more frequent British patrols. As it traveled, Duquesne's companions plotted to kill him and steal the money. Their moment came at a remote campsite. In the dead of night, one drove a knife into Duquesne's bedroll, thinking he was inside. He wasn't. The bedroll was stuffed with clothes, and Duquesne was hiding in the shadows with his rifle. The next morning, Duquesne ordered his African servants to bury the gold in a cave, somewhere near the town of Ermelo. He then set them free on the promise that they would never divulge its location.
So one of his sobriquets became the man who hid the Kruger Millions.
Duquesne's plan was simple. If the Boers won the war, then he would simply uncover the gold and return with it to Pretoria, claiming a hero's welcome and no doubt a handsome reward. If they lost, then all the money would be his to keep.
Fritz took the gold, as he would claim, for patriotic reasons. Because when the Boer government was restored, the gold could be used. But primarily, it was greed. I'm sure it was greed.
But war has a habit of wrecking even the best laid plans. Several months after burying the gold, Duquesne was ambushed by a British patrol. He survived the attack, but he was now a captive of his arch-enemy. And the British had a special treatment reserved for the most dangerous, irreconcilable Boer fighters such as him. They exiled them 8,000 miles away to one of the farthest flung corners of the empire.
There were a number of Afrikaners, or Boers, who were bitter enders, or bitter einders, I believe they called themselves, who would not capitulate, and these were sent to Bermuda. And Fritz was one of those who was sent to Bermuda.
In 1902, the Boer War ended with a British victory. The irony was not lost on Fritz Duquesne, marooned in Bermuda. He no doubt believed the Kruger Millions now belonged to him. If only he could make it back to South Africa. Duquesne escaped from his prisoner of war camp and stowed away on board a yacht bound for New York. But in America, Duquesne was diverted by the prospect of becoming a popular hero.
Fritz used his background to bring celebrity to himself. And he did this by lecturing on his adventures in South Africa. He was his own best promoter. And he was a very good speaker. And as much as he hated the British, he spoke with a British accent.
Why should Duquesne dig for buried gold when he could sell stories about it? He began to make a handsome living as the man who hid the Kruger Millions. Meanwhile, word of his exploits soon made it back to South Africa. They became mixed up with the rumors about Paul Kruger and his dramatic escape on a train full of gold. The legend of the Kruger Millions was born.
There are various stories. Everybody knew somebody who had seen it being done, but nobody had seen it being buried. There was the story of people having buried some of the coins near Ermelo.
Of all the possible places where the treasure could be buried, one of the most likely was Ermelo, Athol Stark's hometown. By the end of 1999, Athol had developed a serious case of gold fever. His research revealed that Ermelo had been a hotbed of treasure hunting for decades. Many people in town had managed to strike it rich down the years. Perhaps he could be the next. The first were a pair of impoverished Boer farmers, 80 years previously.
In 1921, two brothers were building a small dam to try and catch the spring water for their cattle. And while they were digging there, they came across something.
What they discovered was a buried cache of golden Kruger pounds. Within days, they retired to live a life of leisure.
They said that they had got an inheritance from Uncle Paul.
Uncle Paul was an affectionate name for Paul Kruger. In the years that followed, a number of other farmers in the area also became mysteriously wealthy, thanks to old Uncle Paul.
At the end of the Anglo-Boer War, Afrikaners went into poverty. These people were what could be called destitute. But there's a problem here. The people were able to rebound very quickly. You know, within a couple of years, they had herds of sheep and herds of cattle, and the question is, where did all this stuff come from?
Athol realized they all had something in common. All of them were working near the edge of this salty lake, about a mile outside Ermelo. It was near this same lake that a Zulu family made another discovery 40 years previously. It was a tale that chilled Athol to the bone.
The big uproar in our town was the coins that were found during the 1960s by a family of black people who worked as farm workers on the farm, actually the farm next door.
In the middle of the night, one member of the family noticed a group of white Afrikaners digging ditches near the salt lake. So one Sunday afternoon, when everybody was at church, they went to investigate.
When the workers were not there, the farmer was not on the farm, and after themselves digging at the spots where these people had been digging. Came across a container, pulled it out of the ground, and it was full of coins. How many? It's impossible to know. It took them apparently a couple of hours, but every container that they had, from cooking pots to kettles to paraffin tins, they loaded it up with the money that they pulled out of this box. And then, of course, the problem was, what do you do with this money?
These were the bad old days of apartheid, and for a black person to be seen with even one Kruger pound, let alone a whole box full, was an invitation to serious trouble.
They realized that, you know, if they hid it in the floor, that it would be found, whatever they did. That afternoon, there was a funeral, elderly gentleman that had passed away. So they took the money and put it at the bottom of the grave and covered it with soil.
Sure enough, the white treasure hunters returned that evening to keep looking for the Kruger Millions. Instead, they found their secret digging site had been torn apart. They stormed into the Black Township, looking for their gold.
They demanded to know what had happened, who had been digging down there, and nobody, of course, was prepared to tell them. So what they did is they grabbed one of the daughters of the people that lived there. And whipped this child in front of everybody, trying to force them to tell them. Of course, nobody knew anything, so they got away with it.
The white men left town, and a couple of weeks later, the Zulus secretly returned to the gravesite where they had buried the money. They dug up their hidden stash of gold, reburied the corpse, and ran for their lives.
They not only left the farm, but also left Ermelo, and they went to live in a neighboring town.
This family was the very same one that Athol encountered in 1999. He had discovered their dark secret. Now it was his secret too. Athol knew exactly where they had found their coins. He knew others had found money in the same place, He knew about the wagon loads of gold passing through the area during the war. Putting all the evidence together, Athol believed that Ermelo was the hiding place of the Kruger Millions. If he was right, the mother lode might be right on his doorstep, and he could be the one to find it.
Whether that's the entire Kruger Millions or again just a portion adds a lot of weight to the fact that it appears that there probably was something called the Kruger Millions.
Early in 2001, Athol was making plans for his own dig when someone approached him. Incredibly, this man also knew about the fields of gold near the salty lake and Athol's role in the story. He wanted Athol to negotiate access with the white farmers who owned the land. Athol agreed to join him. For the first time, he became a treasure hunter.
We arranged access for them onto the farm, went onto the farm, and they were there for quite a few hours. They brought like a witch doctor called a sangoma. He continually asked for me to be moved away and moved away.
Go away, you devil! Just go! Go away! Go away! Go!
I was about 250 meters away, up on the side of a hill. And I ended up just going right over the top of the hill and lying down in the grass and watching them. And all he was doing, he was walking around and he kept on going back to this one place. And they dug there for a while. And then they called me and they'd found something. What they discovered was this box. Once they got it out, you could see quite clearly it was money.
Astoundingly, the witch doctor had discovered gold.
I think that's the reality kind of hit home is that, oh my goodness, this is actually the truth.
Back at Athol's house, the Count began in earnest.
Yeah, it was quite amazing. Thousands of coins. We estimate, if we're correct, about 14,700 was kind of where we stopped.
At last, Athol was about to strike it rich. Under the agreement he struck with his new partners, he was entitled to a portion of anything that was found.
When you see that, you know, it becomes almost like an emotional thing. It's like you stand there and go like, oh my God, this is true.
However, before he could claim his prize, Athol's wife made a crucial mistake.
It was inside our house on a table, and we tried to take a photograph.
What is she doing here? What are you doing? Are you just...
When they saw that she'd taken a photograph, they rolled this thing up pretty quickly and left. And we couldn't even stop them. It's guys that suddenly became very aggressive because they had said if we find the coins, they will share the coins with us, they will share it with the farmer. That kind of ended just there and then.
Before Athol or anyone had time to react, the men had jumped in their car with all the money. They were gone, and so was Athol's share of the gold.
The shock was 2 or 3 minutes after they drove out my driveway, oh my goodness, they're just driving away with us. And there's nothing I can do. What am I going to do? Phone the police and tell them somebody just stole the Kruger Millions? The cops are going to laugh at me. So they just literally just drove away with us, and there was absolutely nothing I could do.
Within a space of hours, Athol had found a fortune and lost it again. There seemed little hope of Athol ever having his own piece of the Kruger Millions.
We honestly believed that we'd found, this is the Kruger Millions. We honestly believed it. and they loaded it on, and they were gone. That was where you actually almost feel sick, that you actually feel quite ill, that this thing had actually happened while you'd actually stood and actually watched it.
And yet, he still had one more trump card up his sleeve. Very few people knew the exact location where these coins had been uncovered. There had already been at least 3 discoveries of coins near the salty lake. But if the legend was true, they were just the tip of a golden iceberg. Why not return and try to find the main stash? By the middle of the year, Athol was back in the hunt for more gold. And this time, he made his own extraordinary Kruger find.
About 2 kilometers out of town, there's a place that used to be the old way station. And one of the guys there phoned me and said to me, listen, I think you need to come and have a look. We found a statue buried on the property of Paul Kruger.
It was not a cache of Kruger pounds, but a stone pillar bearing Kruger's head. Despite the fact he was keeping the Kruger gold a closely guarded secret, Athol thought the Kruger statue could bring some recognition to his small town. He invited the South African Broadcasting Corporation to Ermelo. He assumed he could publicize the statue while also maintaining a news blackout about the gold. He could not have been more wrong.
The guy asked me a bunch of questions, and when I'd finished answering all the questions about the statue, he then turned around and said, with the mic kind of shoved up in my face, and I said, okay, now tell us all about these coins that people are finding, And immediately, without thinking, I said to him, hold it a moment, turn that camera off, there's no ways I'm answering that question. And without even realizing, the cat was out of the bag.
If Athol's connection to the treasure had been a secret before, it wasn't now. Sure enough, on that evening's news, Athol's vehement denials were broadcast to the nation. Within days, hordes of treasure hunters descended on Ermelo.
It escalated beyond control over the next few weeks. So much so that I was being accosted in the streets by local people who either wanted to know what the story was, or blatantly just said, this is nonsense, what are you doing to our town?
Athol was now a hunted man. Stories appeared as far away as London and Hong Kong about the Kruger Millions, and they all named Athol as the one who knew where they were buried.
That led to us just getting to the point. It was just like, hold it a moment, this is just getting too much now. Our lives were being pulled apart. We would walk past our kids' bedrooms and the curtains would be open, and you'd look over into the park next door and there'd be people on the top of the roofs of cars taking photographs of my family, and just like, hold it a moment, this is going too far.
With gold fever spreading rapidly through Ermelo, Athol lost any chance of finding the missing motherlode of the Kruger Millions. It was a crushing blow. But in the midst of his despair, Athol had an idea. There was a way to end the gold rush nightmare and placate the gold-hungry fanatics thronging his town. A treasure hunting weekend, open to all comers.
People came already from the Friday. We set up some tents and security guards and things like that. We had a big official gold rush opening where the Mrs. South Africa came and officially cut the ribbon, and all these people ran in on the farm.
Best of all, Athol could still make some money himself. Everyone who wanted to dig had to pay him a fee.
We had already 116 people that had in actual fact booked to actually come and dig here today.
People came in their droves, and anticipation was high. In the first few hours, some more gold coins were uncovered. Then, nothing. Holes were dug in every conceivable hiding place, to no avail. After 2 days of continuous searching, the Kruger Millions were nowhere to be found. The few artifacts that were unearthed couldn't even be given away.
These are things that have been dug up, some of them dug up directly at the place where the gold coins were found. The first one is just obviously a piece of quartz that was probably something that was on a mantelpiece. And then various other things, a little statuette of the Holy Family, another statue of Queen Victoria.
The treasure hunt was over, and soon afterwards, Athol decided to put the whole affair behind him. He sold his small collection of Kruger pounds, and he has not been back to the salty lake until today.
The hole that I'm sitting in at the moment is in actual fact the hole where the Zulu-speaking family found quite a large number of coins in the early 1960s. Quite a distance from us, about 400 meters from us, in that open patch of ground over there, they dug quite a large hole, and I actually observed more than 14,700 coins being removed out of the ground.
Athol's quest for the Kruger Millions was over. But the search for answers had only just begun. Where did all that gold come from? And where was the rest of the money? Beyond a few coins, could the Kruger Millions be just a myth? One possible answer lies with Fritz Duquesne, the fanatical Boer soldier who claimed to have buried 30 wagon loads of gold.
Whenever I hear the name Fritz Duquesne, I get a wry smile. I mean, if there is something happening, and if there's intrigue, he will be involved.
For years after the Boer War, Duquesne continued to live as a minor celebrity in the United States, making his name as the man who hid the Kruger Millions. Yet long after the conflict ended, he still carried a burning hatred for the British, blaming them for the death of his family and the demise of his country. During the Great War, he became a spy for Germany, simply to take revenge against Britain. At the outbreak of the Second World War, he volunteered again, this time for the Nazis.
I never came across any information that he had any sympathy for the Nazis or necessarily any sympathy for the Germans. It was his hatred for the British. It was his way of striking out against the British and hopefully as he wanted to destroy the British nation.
Duquesne was ordered to spy on the American arms industry and report on the convoys leaving New York for England. However, his German handler was, in fact, a double agent. This extraordinary footage of Duquesne passing secrets was secretly recorded through a two-way mirror in a carefully orchestrated FBI sting. In the summer of 1941, Duquesne was arrested, along with dozens of co-conspirators.
It made big news. There were 33 of them, and people weren't even aware this was going on. And then suddenly this news broke that a German spy ring was rounded up and captured in New York City.
To this day, the so-called Duquesne spy ring is the largest ever uncovered on American soil. Duquesne was sentenced to 18 years in prison. When he was released in 1954, he was a broken man.
He just managed to eke out an existence living on welfare.
Throughout his life, Duquesne swore that one day he would return to South Africa and uncover the Kruger Millions. In fact, after his exile to Bermuda in 1902, he never saw his beloved homeland again. Fritz Duquesne died, penniless and discredited, in New York in 1956. But could it be that in a cave somewhere in the veldt, there are wagon loads of Kruger pounds that Duquesne buried half a century earlier?
Well, for the sake of Fritz, I like to think there was, but I don't know. There's really no, all we have is his word for it, but his story is as good as any, I guess. Someone get some shovels and go out there and start digging.
If Duquesne did hide the Kruger millions, then his secrets died with him. So what is the true fate of this elusive treasure? There is no doubt that all of Kruger's gold was loaded onto a train in Pretoria in June 1900. But precisely how much was there? There has never been a full account of the gold's true value. So it's entirely possible that all of the treasure hunters down the years have been chasing a shadow.
Once the Transvaal government had nationalized about 10 mines at the start of the war, in those few months, they only amassed about 100,000 pounds of Kruger coins per month for about 5 or 6 months.
From the start of the war to Pretoria's fall, they could have made, at maximum, about 800,000 Kruger pounds.
So there was never a possibility of millions or even 1 million being available to be buried. It just didn't exist. There wasn't so much available.
There was no such thing as the Kruger Millions.
Still, even 800,000 Kruger pounds would be worth tens of millions today. So where are they? Could there still be a motherlode, waiting to be uncovered?
Every later generation had a grandfather who told him about this, who saw the train moving off or saw them packing this into boxes at the Mint on Church Square. So there were people who believed in this.
The truth, sadly, is far more prosaic. For several weeks, the bulk of the gold sat in a railway car at Machadodorp, the Boer headquarters. Word of the train's cargo quickly spread amongst a hungry and impoverished population.
Machadodorp was now a hub of movement and of people, and the public very soon realized there was some gold on that train. And who pitched up? Creditors. And in the next few weeks, they were paid right there in the open.
The bulk of it was given out there in payment of debt.
All the money was quite simply spent. There was nothing left for Fritz Duquesne or anyone else to take away in the apocryphal wagon train. And yet, most of the gold still ended up in the ground, in small amounts, scattered across the countryside.
What you do find are a few Kruger coins that a wealthy farmer had buried before he went on commando in the war.
Boers who were paid in gold Kruger pounds would return home with the money to their farms, fearing the arrival of the British and their scorched earth tactics. The safest thing was often to bury it.
The idea of this, of course, was that these wealthy farmers said, let's keep this and that we've got something to fall back onto after the war. But obviously then some of them were killed and didn't come back, and so that buried piece of gold was never found until a later stage.
This explains the caches of gold uncovered in Ermelo down the years. They were undoubtedly valuable finds, but there were isolated pockets of money, buried by individual farmers. They could not have been part of a great motherlode. There was no motherlode.
My father had a few Kruger pounds that were dug up in a fish pond of an old Boer farmstead.
Still, there is gold out there, buried in the wide open expanse of the veldt. And although it may not be millions, some lucky treasure hunters could still get very, very rich.
Do we believe that this is the Kruger Millions? Not the Kruger Millions, but we believe that it is a portion. There probably was something called the Kruger Millions. I do definitely believe that
The legend of the Kruger Millions lives on.